Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Oh wait, no, this is going to be the final chapter, part 5 of the movie book collection. Let's finish this thing once and for all, for God's sakes. So anyway, I forgot to mention this one because I had to put it in a different place because I didn't have any room to fit it. This is one of the more recent acquisitions to my collection, probably one of my finest. We have the 1947-1948 International Motion Picture Almanac, edited by Terry Ramsey, who brought us this. A Million and One Nights, pretty much the first American book about the history of movies up to 1925. We talked about that in, I think, part 2 or 3 of our movie book series. This I bought on eBay specifically for something that's in it on page XI11, index page. The Great 100. This is probably the first list of great movies ever published. I mean, it's arguable there were sort of lists before this, but this is really kind of the birthplace of where films ranked or great movies ranked lists came from. So I'm not going to go through this list. I kind of went through this in another video I made when I received this book. This is a cool item. These were published from the 1930s, I think into the 1980s. And this list was republished through the years. It was modified as new movies got made. This is a really good look at what people thought in the late 40s the great movies were. Actually, there are some lost films on this list. And totally forgotten movies, too, on this list from the silent era. And some D.W. Griffith films that people don't even think about now. Like shorts and things. This was a Quigley publication. I think they did Film Daily. And they also did this, Almanac. It's an annual. It goes over the industry for the year. Facts, figures, statistics, happenings, movie releases, theater information. It's got everything. Like anything you need to know about a particular year in the cinema, especially in the classic era, it's all in here. This is an incredible reference book. This is the only one I have in this series. The stars at Paramount. Who are the stars? Well, Bing Crosby, Bob Hope. Yes, they would have been the biggest. Ray Milland, Olivia de Havilland, Alan Ladd, Barbara Stanwyck, Paulette Goddard, Dorothy Lamour, Betty Hutton, Veronica Lake, Sonny Tufts, Joan Caulfield, William Holden, Elizabeth Scott, Burt Lancaster, Gail Russell, Diana Lynn, Sterling Hayden, Robert Preston, John Lund, William Bendix, Barry Fitzgerald, Howard Da Silva, and Billy DeWolfe. Most of those you will have heard of if you know anything about cinema. And Paramount had a pretty good roster in 1947, 1948. Love this book, love having this, and this baby is going back on the shelf. Alright, we've got to go like super fast because I've got a lot of books. This is my biography section. It's basically the history of entertainment in terms of at least people who interest me. These were done by something called Pyramid Books. These were the Pyramid Illustrated History of the Movies. This is the one on Charlie Chaplin. They have these nice silver kind of marquee things going on. They're really nice volumes. I used to really love these in the 70s, and this is when they came out. I used to buy them whenever I could afford them. They weren't like super expensive. I got this, this is a recent acquisition. I just got it off the bargain. This is worth a lot of money. This Chaplin one is very rare and very valuable. The Marx Brothers one is a little more common. I used to use this one a lot because I was a big fan of the Marxes back in the 70s when I first started watching old movies. And I've got a few more volumes of these Pyramid Classics in here. We'll hit some of them. Okay, I got a biography of Fred Astaire. Two biographies of Luis Buñuel, the Spanish director. One of them, My Last Sigh, the autobiography. Here's one by John Baxter, The Noel Coward Diaries. Noel Coward by Philip Hoare, another biography. George Cukor's biography, A Double Life. The Life and Death of Peter Sellers. This was made into a film with Jeffrey Rush. The Art of W.C. Fields by William K. Everson. W.C. Fields by himself. This is W.C. Fields' own writings that were collected by, I think, his grandson. W.C. Fields and Me by Carlotta Monti, who was W.C. Fields', I guess, lover, paramour, secretary, whatever you want to call her. It's a good book. A lot of people kind of trashed it because, you know, she doesn't necessarily have great things always to say about him, and W.C. Fields fans were like outraged. But, you know, get a life, have balance, okay? I'm sure what she says has some validity. It's a good book. Print the Legend. This is about John Ford. And, of course, that line comes from the man who shot Liberty Valance. Life and Legend of Gene Fowler by H. Allen Smith. Well, H. Allen Smith and Gene Fowler were prolific writers back in the 40s and 50s. Gene Fowler was part of that Hollywood Hellfire Club that John Barrymore, W.C. Fields, John Decker, the artist, and Sadakichi Hartman, the artist or poet or philosopher or whatever he was, were part of in L.A. They were a bunch of drunks, a bunch of good time guys. We got Lillian Gish, The Movies Mr. Griffith and Me, An Affair to Remember, a book about Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn's alleged affair. Okay, we got Buster Keaton here, a book by, which one is this? I have a couple. David Robinson's book on Buster Keaton. Very nice. And we got another John Ford. This was Peter Bogdanovich's book. I don't know if you've ever seen some of the interviews with John Ford that Bogdanovich attempted to do. John Ford was a very recalcitrant character and was not cooperative, like this book is not being. All right, get in there. So we got Tom Dardis's biography of Buster Keaton here, and we got another Pyramid Illustrated classic of Greta Garbo. This one I got fairly recently, I think, out of a clearance bin. There we go. There's Tom Dardis's Buster Keaton book. Hitchcock on Hitchcock by Sidney Gottlieb. Judy Garland, The Secret Life of an American Legend by David Shipman. David Shipman's a good writer. Alec Guinness, My Name Escapes Me. I've got 3 Alec Guinness biographies. I think one of them's gone because it fell apart. I read one of them. He's a really good writer, very funny, very humorous about himself and his life. Charmed Lives by Michael Korda. This is about the Korda family, the British production family, very famous directors and producers of prestige movies in Britain in the 30s and 40s. Everything is Cinema by Richard Brody. This is about the French director Jean-Luc Godard. Goldwyn by A. Scott Berg. Berg's a great historical writer. This is about Sam Goldwyn, the producer. Very famous producer, very influential. Here's one of the other Alec Guinnesses. Alec Guinness, A Positively Final Appearance. There he is, being the great showman. And we've got a sort of what I call a bio study of Frank Capra and his works. This is another one from the 70s that I used heavily. This is a really good one. This is done by Richard Glatzer. Got a couple of biographies of Laurence Olivier. Laurence Olivier by Terry Coleman Olivier. And Sir Larry by someone named Kiernan. Sorry, I don't know his full name. We got a great book with by Henry Jaglom of Orson Welles' lunches that he had with Orson back in the 70s. This is kind of like the bad side of Orson. This is Orson, kind of the insufferable character, kind of the counterbalance to Peter Bogdanovich's view on Orson. If you read both, you really get a good, well-rounded view of Orson. This is the Garden of Allah. This is about a hotel in Hollywood back in the Golden Age. Don't know much about it, but it looks fascinating. Has great pictures in it. This is Behind the Screen. This is about gays and lesbians in Hollywood. This is by William J. Mann. I read another one by Vito Russo, The Celluloid Closet, I think it was called. That was a great book. I haven't read this one, though. Hollywood, Garson Kanin. Garson Kanin was a writer-director in Hollywood in the Golden Age, a very good one. And this is kind of his humorous take on what went on in town. Lulu in Hollywood. This is a famous book by Louise Brooks, the actress, the silent actress. And this is Hirschfeld's New York. This is not really a movie book. It's just a book of caricatures by Al Hirschfeld. Is it Al? I hope it is. Anyway, I'm sorry the lighting is not good here because I'm kind of down in here. We're down in the trenches, baby. Okay, Jazz Cleopatra. This is a book about Josephine Baker, the entertainer, American entertainer who was in Europe and did a lot of risque things on stage that would not have been allowed in America. And she became the toast of Europe, toast of France and Germany and Berlin back in the day. And we have Alan Arkin's An Improvised Life, biography of that fine actor. My Life with Chaplin by Lita Gray Chaplin. David Sten's book on Clara Bow. Let's see if we can see. There she is. And Sidney Lumet's book, Making Movies. Sidney Lumet, a great director. From Reverence to Rape by Molly Haskell. This is a great essay book on the history of the perceptions of women in cinema. Rudy Blesch's biography of Buster Keaton. Akira Kurosawa's biography, Something Like an Autobiography, it's called. We got A Passion for Films by Richard Roud. This is a book about the French film archivist Henri Langlois, who ran the Cinémathèque Française from, I guess, the 1920s up until the 1960s or so. Focus on Hitchcock. I don't know much about this one, but it's a vintage book. I think I got this one at Goodwill, which was a great find. The Films in My Life by Francois Truffaut, the great French director. All right. Irving Thalberg by Bob Thomas. Irving Thalberg, of course, was the great producer at MGM during its golden heyday. Gable and Lombard by Warren Harris. This was made into a movie in 1975 about Clark Gable and Carole Lombard, of course. John Ford by Joseph McBride, another John Ford book. Just Kids by Patti Smith. Again, this is not really... This is more, I guess, entertainment adjacent. It's not really a movie book. It's a great book, though. I love that book. This was actually given to me by someone who was special to me in the past. Orson Welles by Simon Callow. This is one of the volumes. I think he wrote, 3 volumes in this series? This is Orson Welles. Orson Welles and Peter Bogdanovich, edited by Jonathan Rosenbaum, the film critic. This is a great book. This is an essential one, honestly. This one and Jaglams together give us a really three-dimensional, prismatic view of Orson Welles. The Funny Man by Steve Allen. This is just a book about a bunch of comedians, vintage comedians from the 50s, more or less. Not really a movie book, but anyway. And we got Bring On the Empty Horses by David Niven. Niven, of course, was a very fine, talented, somewhat flippant British actor, I guess you could say. Very kind of the epitome of class and urbanity, and always great in farcical comedy. And his books are very funny views of life and entertainment and his life. Now we have a series of vintage books that I would call entertainment world adjacent. Not all necessarily movie books, but this is Haywood Broun, Seeing Things at Night. Haywood Broun was a correspondent and newspaper columnist back in the 20s and 30s. His son was Haywood Hale Broun, who used to be on CBS. I remember him. I don't know what this is. This is just a column of... I don't know. I honestly have never read this. It's not really a movie book, but it's a vintage book. Alan Churchill's The Great White Way. This is Alan Churchill's book about Broadway back in the day, around the turn of the 20th century. He wrote a great book called The Theatrical 20s, which I have up there somewhere. We're not going to show that. Goodnight, Sweet Prince. This is a book that Gene Fowler wrote about John Barrymore, about his life. This is his biography, the biography of John Barrymore. It's an amazing biography. It's a very fine biography. It's written by a friend, so it's not super critical, but it is critical. You know, he doesn't avoid some of the problems that Barrymore had, but he was also writing it more from a fond perspective. It was written after the death of Barrymore, so it's almost like a beautiful obituary. It is one of the most beautifully written books I think I've ever seen. Minutes of the Last Meeting. This again is that Hollywood Hellfire Club of W.C. Fields, John Barrymore, John Decker, the commercial artist, and Sadakichi Hartman, kind of the hanger-on, the philosopher, the ragtag aesthete. They were all drunken buddies in Hollywood back in the 30s and 40s. And Gene Fowler was part of that clique, and he wrote this book. It's magnificent. This is a book by a guy named Alexander Woollcott, long ago. It's reminiscences of his past. He was a theater critic, a savage kind of columnist in the New York papers. Part of the Algonquin Round Table with Dorothy Parker et al. Here's another Alexander Woollcott biography. He was, I guess, tangentially related to Hollywood. He was on the stage in a show called The Man Who Came to Dinner, which was made into a movie, but he was not in it. So let's move on. We got a bunch of books by Robert Benchley. He was a humorist, columnist back in the day, and he was in a lot of short movies back in the 30s and 40s, and doing the everyman shtick, kind of the put upon, middle-aged, everything's going wrong in life kind of guy. Very funny stuff. We got Laurel and Hardy. This is a very valuable book. This one came out in the 70s, movie paperbacks. I want to see if I can show you some of this, but it's really dark here. It's this is the kind of stuff we used to get when, you know, it was hard to see these films just any time you wanted to see them. You had to kind of wait for them to show up. Here's another Algonquin Roundtable book, another Robert Benchley, another Robert Benchley. Here's a Fred Allen. Fred Allen was a great radio entertainer back in the 40s and 50s, and also on television. He was on What's My Line for several years. He was a great wit, probably one of the funniest men ever in the history of America, and Johnny Carson was very heavily influenced by him. Here's another H. Allen Smith. He was a columnist back in the day. These are collections of his various humorous observational writings on Americana, and there's 3 of those. So we got a book on Francis Ford Coppola. Francis Ford Coppola, the making of his movies. Here's a book by William Castle, the great exploitation director of the 50s and 60s. He did cheap horror films. He did those famous stunts and gimmicks where you'd have the ghost come out on a string and scare people, and have joy buzzers in the seats and the tingler to give them a shock, you know, electric shocks and stuff. And he's a very funny man and tells his story with great elan and humor. Okay, so we have sort of cultural books down here. There's a riot going on. These are about the 60s. Got a Revolution. This is Jefferson Airplane. These aren't really movies. Well, let's pass these. These are all kind of... This one is actually about the Mitchell brothers, who made some of the X-rated movies of the 70s. So that is a movie book. Generation Ecstasy. Again, this is sort of the 1980s. Swing, Swing, Swing. That's Benny Goodman. So we got City of Nets by Otto Friedrich. This is one of the great ones. This is about Hollywood in the 1940s. Lots of vignettes, very detailed and flavorful vignettes of Hollywood in the 1940s. Hollywood noir, Hollywood scandal. Much better than Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon. If you want to get something that's actually somewhat true, this is the book you want to get. We got a book on George Raft, the actor. Not a common book to run across. Got a book on Al Jolson. You know old Al Jolson. And then you got another Groucho Marx biography by Charlotte Chandler, Hello, I Must Be Going. And we got a book on Flo Ziegfeld, Florian Ziegfeld, the great producer on Broadway with the Ziegfeld Follies back around the turn of the century. Look at that. That's what we call an artful nude. You know, his story is a long and very influential one in the history of American show business that we don't have time to get into. We got Julia Phillips, You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again. It's way down here and you can't see it. A book by S.J. Perelman, the humorist and Hollywood writer, and a Woody Allen book. Okay, another Alexander Woollcott book. Here's a book by Ben Hecht, the columnist, the screenwriter, great screenwriter, newspaper reporter in Chicago back in the day. Don't have time to get into it. Charlotte Chandler again with a book about, I think, Mae West. Yes, She Always Knew How. And some books by and about Oscar Levant, the pianist who was part of the Hollywood scene. His story is way too complicated to go into, but suffice it to say, he's an interesting enough character that I have 3 books on him. Preston Sturges, a book, I think, by his granddaughter, Sandy Sturges. I believe that's his granddaughter. Have not read this. So that's it. I got some old phone books here that have nothing to do with anything. That's the Biographical Entertainment Book Collection. I also have a Kino video catalog here, and a Cook International video collection catalog right here with Catherine Deneuve from The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, 1964 classic. We got Jane Fonda in a Roger Vadim film. Not Barbarella this time. This is a nice catalog. Okay, folks, there's a few more movie books upstairs in a hutch. Let me quickly go show you those. Okay, I had a couple up here. I got this one, Round Up the Usual Suspects, The Making of Casablanca by Al-Jean Harmetz. I started reading this and it was pretty good and I never finished it. And then a biography of Humphrey Bogart by A.M. Sperber and Eric Lax. Never quite started this one, but it looks like a good one. I also have the autobiography of Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah. I read most of this and then I got waylaid and didn't finish it. Tallulah Bankhead, of course, was a great actress of Broadway, and she made a few films. She's not generally known as a film actress, but she was just more or less known as kind of a hellraiser of her time, you know, a liberated woman, if you will. And that finally concludes the movie book collection.